In this presentation, we're going to look at creating items for the productive skills, speaking and writing. In part 1, we will look at speaking and writing as they are described in the CEFR. In part 2, we will look in more detail at how we define the respective constructs of speaking and writing for testing purposes. In part 3, we will look at how this translates into practice and go over some sample items. An important feature of writing productive skill content is selecting appropriate visual input to go along with the written prompts. In part 4, therefore, we will look at how we source picture prompts. Finally, in part 5, we will look at rating and give you a brief overview of how the tasks are subsequently marked. In this part, we will look at speaking and writing as they are described in the CEFR. Speaking and writing in the CEFR are described within two different frameworks, interaction and production. On this slide, we will look at interaction. For speaking, this would include conversations and discussions where at least two speakers interact and cooperate with one another. For writing, this would include correspondence, for example letters and emails, as well as notes, messages, and forms. On this slide, we will consider production. For both speaking and writing, the focus is more on longer and more extended output. It is not addressed to one particular person. For speaking, this may include an extended monologue in which a person relates an experience and makes an argument for something. For writing, it may include longer and non-interactive text, such as stories, reports, and essays. The CEFR provides scales for each individual subcomponent for production and interaction, for example, scales for essay writing, or sustaining a spoken monologue. On this slide, however, we will consider the overall scales for spoken interaction, as presented in the CEFR Companion Volume, which is a revised and updated version published in 2018. As with reading and listening, we can see that descriptors at lower levels focus upon sentences and phrase level output. As we move up the scale, they become increasingly focused upon more extended and complex speech. Similarly, in writing, the focus shifts increasingly from phrase level to text level as we move up the table. There is also a focus on matters of personal relevance at lower levels, to a wider variety of subjects at higher levels. As we will see later, this is very much reflected in how we need to write our input prompts. Here, we will consider in more detail the implications that these descriptors have for item writing. As we have seen, it is important to consider the nature of the level relative to the kind of information the prompt is trying to elicit. For example, at lower levels, speaking and writing prompts should elicit short answers on personal and familiar topics. At higher levels, prompts should reliably elicit longer answers in which test takers are encouraged to deal with the topic in broader and more abstract terms. We also need to consider whether the questions are suitable for global audiences and do not depend on any unreasonable expectations of world knowledge or topic familiarity. It is obviously important to make sure that the wording is clear and concise. Consider also whether each question is eliciting new information. By this, we mean that each prompt needs to be a fresh start and should not refer back to a previous question. Each question needs to have a sufficiently distinct angle, so that there is no danger of repetition between responses to different prompts. In this section, we will look in more detail at how the construct is defined for the productive skills. Here are some examples of target subskills within speaking and writing. In speaking, for example, as well as linguistic aspects such as grammatical accuracy, we are also interested in fluency, the extent to which a speaker is able to keep going. Discourse management refers to their output at a more holistic level. For example, whether they're able to refer back to what they have already said, or signal what they are going to say effectively. Unlike writing, speaking happens in real time and mostly without planning. So, strategic competence refers to strategies in order to manage the real-time processing of speech, such as fillers or repairs. Also important are the features such as tone and intonation, as these are often laden with meaning, such as whether something is intended seriously or not. Writing, by its nature, is much more planned than speech. So writing subskills, therefore, include a greater focus on structure at both sentence and text level. Other features include correct punctuation, spelling, and a context-appropriate register. On this slide, we can see a writing model for the purposes of assessment. The text is in the center. On the left is the world knowledge and linguistic knowledge that the test taker will bring with them. On the right are the processes that a text will go through, including preparation and planning. At the top are the features of the task, such as the prompt, referred to here as the stimulus, the target genre, and the specified length. All these different elements will interact in the production of the final text. Finally, at the bottom, is the marking of the task, according to a standardized rating scale. On this slide, we can see a similar model for speaking. In many ways, it is similar to writing. The text, now referred to as the discourse, is again at the center. The main differences are within the strategies and skills on the right. As we have mentioned, speaking requires elements of real-time processing and a greater deal of interaction. This means that features such as turn-taking and strategic competence become much more relevant. We will now take a look at some further considerations from the perspective of item writers. Unlike our reading and listening content, speaking and writing tasks are commissioned in batches. This means that you will write an entire speaking or writing test. A1 tasks are now produced in-house from a batch of pre-existing questions and are no longer sent out to item writers. Depending on the variant, therefore, a batch might include Task 2, Task 3, and Task 4, which correspond to A2, B1, and B2 levels. Item writers will not be commissioned to write individual or separate tasks only. As part of the process, it is also necessary to write a sample response to each prompt you write. This helps you and the reviewer ensure that the question will elicit the appropriate kind of response from the test taker. You can also see here an example of what we mean by a prompt on a familiar topic and a prompt on an abstract topic. The theme, waiting, is the same in both cases. A familiar prompt would ask the test taker to discuss it relative to their own experiences. For example, tell me about the last time you had to wait for something. A more abstract question on the theme would be, why do people dislike waiting for a long time? As you can see, the idea in the second prompt is to encourage the test taker to go beyond their personal experience and discuss the topic more broadly. In this section, we will look at an overview of the speaking and writing components in Apttus General and look at some sample items. As we have mentioned, Task 1 is now written in-house according to a bank of pre-selected questions. From the item writing perspective, therefore, we are going to focus on Tasks 2, 3, and 4. In speaking, In Task 2, the test taker will begin by describing a picture. The second question will ask them to relate some aspect of the picture to their own experience. A third question asks them to express an opinion or discuss the topic in more general terms. In Task 3, they will compare two pictures. As in Task 2, they will then relate the topic to their own experience and express a broader opinion or perspective. Finally, in Task 4, they will produce a long term based upon a series of prompts. There will be a picture prompt, as well as 3 written prompts which progress through personal experience, personal impressions, and wider relevance to society. As you can see, in each task, there is a progression from personal to more abstract. Here is an example task from Writing Task 3. The context is a running club. The first question focuses on a more concrete personal experience, and the second question attempts to elicit a personal preference or opinion. The third question asks the test taker to discuss the theme more broadly and more abstractly. This question should always require the test taker to elaborate on the content from a wider perspective than their own personal experience. The writing paper will provide the context of an online club or society, for example, a running club or a book club. Task 2 is simply an introductory question on the topic. Task 3 includes 3 separate questions on the same topic, which again progress from a personal to a wider perspective. Finally, in Task 4, the test taker will write 2 emails in response to a short letter or notice. One will be an informal email to a friend, and one will be a more formal email to an unknown reader. This is a sample of Speaking Task 2. As you can see, there is a picture prompt. The first question is always the same: describe the picture. Selecting appropriate pictures for this task is therefore very important. The second question prompts the candidate to talk about an aspect of the picture relative to their own experience. Thirdly, the third question requires the test taker to discuss the topic in more abstract terms. As you can see, this progression from familiar to abstract always needs to be kept in mind. In this section, we will provide you with some tips on sourcing photos for speaking and writing tasks. We always use the website istock.com to search for images. It is a huge database of images. You should provide the web link, where prompted, in the template, and the production team will purchase the necessary image rights. The database is searchable and works along the same lines as a Google image search. You type in a few keywords and begin browsing for something suitable. It is important to consider the image relative to the task it is being chosen for. For example, for descriptive and comparative tasks, there always needs to be enough things to talk about. Here, you can see 2 photos which were selected for the photo comparison task in Speaking Part 3. In both photos, there are clear backgrounds and foregrounds with sufficient detail to discuss, describe, and contrast. Selecting images with clear backgrounds, middle grounds, and foregrounds is a good tip, therefore. In Speaking Task 4, the long turn, there is a picture prompt, but this is not directly relevant to the task. The task will focus on some kind of abstract theme. Here is an example of a picture that was selected for success. You can search for pictures on such abstract themes on iStock by simply typing in the keywords. In this final section, we will consider the rating stage. Unlike reading and listening, which is marked by computer, we have a team of trained raters who mark all speaking and writing tasks. Many of you are or have been examiners. If not for Aptis, many of you will have examined for other tests such as IELTS or Cambridge Main Suite. For APTIS, the turnaround time target is 48 hours. This means test takers can get their results very quickly. The scales are holistic rather than analytic. This means that an overall mark is awarded for the task rather than individual marks. If you are familiar with IELTS, you will know that they use an analytic scale. In speaking, for example, a mark is awarded for fluency, grammar, lexis, and pronunciation, and an average is then calculated. As we have each seen, speaking and writing components are divided into 4 tasks. Each task will be marked by a different examiner to minimize the bias as far as possible. The holistic marks for each task are then pulled back together to calculate the overall mark for the entire test. The rating scales are task-specific. This means that there is no single scale that is used to rate everything, but raters use the specific scale for the task they are working on. The scales are also linked to the CEFR. Let's look at an example. This is the segment of the scale that is used to rate tasks 2 and 3 in the speaking test. The scale only goes up to B1 level, because the task is not designed to elicit sufficient samples of language to be able to gauge performance at higher levels. This is what the Task 4 scale would be for. For item writing purposes, therefore, it is very important to get the level of the prompts right in order to ensure test takers have the best possible chance to demonstrate their ability fully at each respective level. Thank you very much for your attention. While writing, speaking, and writing prompts are shorter, there are numerous factors to bear in mind. As always, post any questions or comments in the forum below.